The sandwich was turkey on wheat with mustard, made at 6:45 in the morning in the small kitchen of her apartment on the 4th floor of a building that had one working elevator and a view of the alley rather than the street, and it represented, in the most literal sense available, the last prepared food she had until Friday, which was 4 days away. She knew this not in the vague way of a person who had not checked their finances recently, but in the precise way of a person who had checked them very recently, and for whom the checking had produced a number that was specific and clear, and that she had incorporated into her planning for the week before the week began. She was not a person who avoided the numbers. She had never found that avoiding them changed them. She had been a librarian at the Calloway branch for 6 years, which meant she had passed the period when the work was new enough to carry her through the financial specifics on enthusiasm, and had arrived at the period when the specifics were the specifics. The salary was the salary, and the work was the work, and she still preferred the work to any other work she had tried or imagined, which was either a testament to something about her character, or to something about the work, or to some combination of the two that she had stopped trying to parse, because the parsing did not change anything, and the work itself was what was in front of her every day, and it was, by any measure she could apply to it, worth showing up for. The Calloway branch was 10 minutes from her apartment on foot, and 6 minutes on the bicycle she had bought second-hand 3 years ago, and that had held together through 2 winters and a collision with a delivery driver, who had apologized so extensively that she had ended up feeling worse about his distress than about her knee. She walked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because walking was the specific kind of thinking time that the bicycle, which required attention to traffic, was not. On the walk, she usually thought about whatever she was reading, or about the programs she was planning for the branch, or about the specific problems of the Tuesday or Thursday that were different from the specific problems of other days. On the Tuesday of the sandwich, she was thinking about none of these things because the Tuesday of the sandwich was the Tuesday after she had discovered that the branch's summer reading budget had been cut by 40% in a memo she had not been consulted about, and the thinking she was doing on the walk was the thinking of a person who had received information that required a significant response and who had not yet determined what the significant response should be. She arrived at the branch and worked for 4 hours, and at 12:15 she took her lunch break and put the sandwich in her bag and went outside. The sky had the quality of a sky that had not decided what it was going to do but was leaning toward something committed, which was the quality that skies had in October in this city, a quality that people who had lived here long enough recognized, and that people who had not learned to recognize meant that you kept a jacket on the hook behind your chair, even on the days when you thought you would not need it. She had kept the jacket. She did not have the jacket with her. The park was a block from the branch. The specific kind of urban park that was not green enough to feel like nature, but was green enough to feel like a break from concrete, with a path and some benches and a stand of trees that were doing their October thing, which was turning the colors that trees in October turned in this climate, a process she found interesting every year in the way that she found the specific reliability of things that happened on schedule interesting, not surprising but worth attending to. She had a bench she usually used, a bench that faced east and that had a particular quality of light in the early afternoon that was better than the light on the west-facing benches, not dramatically better, but better in the specific way that mattered when you were eating your lunch and wanted the experience of eating your lunch to be one you had chosen to be in rather than one you were enduring. She was on the path toward her bench when the sky made its decision, which was to rain, and the rain was not the tentative beginning that sometimes preceded a longer event, but was committed from its first moment, the kind of rain that arrived as though it had been waiting and had been told it could begin. She was not carrying the jacket, and she was also not carrying an umbrella, because she had 2 umbrellas, and both of them were at the branch, and had been there since the previous rainy period when she had brought them in, and then the rain had stopped, and she had left them. She did the thing she did when she was caught in the rain without an umbrella, which was to accept that she was going to be rained on, because the alternative, which was to stand in a doorway and wait, required an amount of patience for the specific kind of waiting that being in a doorway in the rain required, and she did not have that patience. She had nearly reached the bench when she saw the man. He was already sitting on the bench, which was unusual in the specific way that it was unusual to find anyone on an east-facing park bench in a city park in the early afternoon of a rainy October Tuesday, because the east-facing park bench in a city park in the early afternoon of a rainy October Tuesday was not where people chose to be when they had a choice about where to be, and the thing about the man that she noticed before she noticed anything else about him was that he appeared to have a choice and to have chosen this. He was dressed in the specific way of men who wore clothes that had been made for them or had been bought with the kind of attention that produced a similar result, and his coat was the kind of coat that repelled water rather than absorbing it, which meant his situation was not the situation of someone who had been caught without preparation. He had prepared for rain, and he was sitting in it nonetheless, with the quality of a man who was exactly where he had decided to be. She sat down at the other end of the bench, which was what she would have done regardless of the weather, because the bench was where she had been going, and the rain was not going to be made worse by her sitting in it rather than standing in it. And she took the sandwich out of her bag and looked at it, and looked at the rain, and looked at the man at the other end of the bench, and something happened in her assessment of the situation that was not a decision so much as a recognition, which was the recognition that the man at the other end of the bench had the quality of a person who had not eaten recently, not the quality of someone who was hungry in the ordinary way of a person waiting for their next meal, but the quality of someone for whom food had not been a primary concern for long enough, that the absence of it had settled into their body in a way that was less about physical hunger and more about the specific kind of depletion that came from being focused on something that was not the ordinary maintenance of the self. She had read enough to recognize this quality when she encountered it. She had read it in characters, and she had seen it in the patrons of her branch, and she had seen it in people on benches and on buses, and she had learned, from the reading and from the seeing, that the quality had many sources, and that none of the sources made the quality more or less deserving of response. She had also learned, from the woman who had raised her and who had had opinions about these things that were not sophisticated in the philosophical sense, but were very clear in the practical sense, that if you had something and there was someone next to you and you could share it, you shared it, and that the analysis of the situation came after the sharing, not before. She broke the sandwich in half and held out one half to him. She did not say anything when she did it because she had found that saying things when offering something to someone you did not know often produced a quality of social complexity that the offering itself did not produce, and the offering itself was the thing, and she held out the half, and he looked at it, and then looked at her, and the looking lasted for a moment that was longer than the moment that usually preceded the acceptance or refusal of something being offered, a moment that had the specific quality of a person encountering something they had not encountered in a while, and were taking the time to identify. He took the half. He said something brief, 2 words, and they were the words of gratitude in the form that people used who were accustomed to gratitude as an obligation rather than a reflex. The specific form that came from a long practice of saying the right thing rather than from the feeling that produced the right thing, and she heard the difference, and she did not respond to it except by biting into her own half, because the response to the form that gratitude took was not a thing that needed a response. They ate in the rain, which was the thing she had not expected to do with her lunch, but that turned out to be the thing she was doing, and it was not unpleasant. The park was empty except for them and for a dog on a leash at the far end of the path, whose owner was standing under a tree and looking at their phone, and the rain was doing the specific thing that rain did to the quality of sound in a city park, which was to reduce the ambient sound to a closer register, to make the space feel more bounded and therefore more complete. She ate her half of the sandwich and he ate his, and neither of them spoke for several minutes. and the several minutes of not speaking had the quality of silence between people who are not performing the absence of speech, but who are simply not speaking. And there was a difference, and she could tell it. He asked her about the branch when she mentioned it in passing, something about the light inside in the afternoon, and she answered in the way she answered when she was talking about the branch, which was with the specific quality of attention that she brought to things she cared about, not with enthusiasm that was performed, but with the accuracy of a person describing something they understood well. He listened to what she said with the same quality of attention that she had noticed in the moment before he took the half sandwich, the attention of a person who was not waiting for their turn to speak but was actually listening, and she noticed this without commenting on it, the same way she noticed the rain and the empty park and the dog at the end of the path. When the rain eased, which it did after approximately 20 minutes, rather than stopping, he stood. He said the two words again, and they had more inside them this time, more than the form, and she looked up at him, standing in the not-quite rain, and she could see what she had read as depletion had been replaced by something that was not energy exactly, but was the restoration of some quality that the depletion had been covering, and the restoration was something small, and she had not done anything to produce it except sit in the rain and share her lunch and not make it into anything. He turned and walked away down the path, and she watched him go the way she watched things she was not sure what to make of, which was carefully and without the pressure to reach a conclusion before the looking was done. He had been gone for approximately 30 seconds when she saw it. It was at the base of the oak tree, 2 feet behind the bench, placed with a care that indicated intention rather than accident. A small bunch of flowers, not elaborate and not fresh enough to have been purchased that day, wrapped in the kind of simple paper that florists used when the flowers were the point rather than the presentation. She looked at the flowers, and she looked at the bench, and she looked down the path in the direction he had gone, and she sat in the particular quality of understanding in progress. That was what she felt when she had most of the pieces of something, but not all of them yet. And she thought about the bench and the rain and the quality of his being there, and she sat with the not all of it for the remainder of her lunch break, which was approximately 8 minutes, and then she went back to the branch. He looked different inside. This was the first thing she noticed, not because the difference was dramatic, but because she was paying the kind of attention that produced the observation of small things, the attention of someone who had been thinking about him on and off for 26 hours and had therefore arrived at the moment of his entering the branch with a specific acuity about him. Outside, on the bench, in the park, in the rain, he had had the quality of a man in his element in a specific way. The rain had not diminished him, and the park bench had not diminished him, because the outdoors and the exposure were things his bearing was calibrated for, the bearing of a man who had spent a long time in spaces that were not always comfortable, and had made his peace with the discomfort such that it was no longer something he needed to contend with. Inside the Calloway branch, which was a different kind of space entirely, he had the quality of a man who was in a space that was not his natural environment, and who was managing this without difficulty, but who was, nonetheless, in a space that required a different kind of calibration from the one he had used the previous day. The branch was not large. It had the specific size of a neighborhood branch, in a city that had more branches than it had resources to maintain them all at the level they deserved, which was to say, it was small enough to feel friendly, and large enough to contain what it needed to contain, and had been decorated in the specific way of public spaces that had been decorated by people who cared about the people who used to them, and who had been given a limited budget to act on that caring. The walls had artwork by local artists rotated on a schedule she maintained, and the children's section had a rug in the shape of a world map that she had found at an estate sale for a price that the branch could afford, and the whole space had the specific quality of a room that had been thought about by someone who understood that the quality of a room affected the quality of what happened in it, and who had acted on that understanding without having enough money to act on it completely. He stood near the entrance for a moment when he came in, looking at the space with the quality of looking that she had already observed in him, the quality of a person taking in a room rather than simply entering it, and she watched him from the desk where she was working on the budget cut response, and she did not signal her presence, not because she was concealing it, but because she was curious about what he would do if she did not intervene, which was a specific kind of curiosity that came from the same place as the working decision she had made the previous evening, the place that was assembling information before forming conclusions. He found her. He moved through the space in the specific way of a man who was accustomed to finding what he was looking for in spaces where he had not been before, and he arrived at her desk, and she looked up at him, and the looking up was the first time she had seen him from the front in good light, because the previous day had been the bench and the rain and the angle of two people sitting at the same end of a bench, which was a different geometry from the geometry of him standing in front of her desk in the afternoon light of the Calloway branch's main reading room. He was, in the good light, someone who had clearly been a particular kind of person for a long time, and whose face showed what that kind of being had done to it, not in a way that was readable as a catalogue of specific events, but in the way that the consistent application of a particular quality of will and attention over many years made itself visible in a face. She kept her expression at the level of professional welcome, which was the specific expression she wore for all patrons when they approached her desk, and which she had developed over 6 years into a version that was genuinely welcoming rather than performed. And she held it there because the working decision she had made the previous evening included continuing to behave toward him according to what the direct observation had shown her. And what the direct observation on the bench in the park had shown her was a person she had been willing to sit with in the rain and share her lunch with. And a person she had been willing to do that with was a person she was willing to welcome to the branch in the way she welcomed everyone. He did not immediately say why he had come. He stood at the desk and looked at the room again briefly, and then at her.
I have not been inside a public library in a long time.
And the way he said it was the way that people said things that were true and that they had not said recently enough, that the saying of them had a slight quality of the unfamiliar, as though the sentence had not been used for a while, and the speaker was checking whether it still fit.
The branch is here when you are.
Which was what she said to people who indicated they had been away from libraries for a while, because it was true and because it did not press them about the gap. He asked if she could help him find something to read, and the asking had the quality of a request from a person who was not accustomed to making requests of this kind, which was the kind where the help required was not the help of expertise or authority, but the help of a person who knew something you needed. She had developed, over 6 years of helping people find things to read, a specific set of questions she asked to narrow the territory, questions about what they had liked before, and what they were in the mood for, and what they were trying to get from the reading, because people wanted different things from books at different times, and the right book depended on which of those things was currently relevant. She asked the questions and he answered them, and the answers were the answers of a person who read but who did not often talk about reading, who had opinions but had not had occasion to articulate them recently. And the articulation was happening with the specific quality of things being said for the first time, rather than repeated from a previous saying. What the answers suggested was not a particular genre or author, but a particular quality. He wanted something that was true about people. Not true in the sense of non-fiction, but true in the sense of being written by someone who had actually looked at how people were rather than how people were supposed to be. And that was honest about the looking. She had categories for this kind of request, and she moved through the stacks with the specific knowledge of her own collection that 6 years of working with it had produced, the knowledge that was partly organizational, knowing where things were, and partly curatorial, knowing what was in the things and what they were like, and who they were for. She came back with 3 books, and put them on the desk in front of him, and described each of them in the way she described books to patrons, which was the way of a person who had read them and was trying to give the other person enough to decide whether they wanted to, rather than trying to convince them to. He listened with the attention she had already observed, and he picked up each book and looked at it in the way people looked at books when they were deciding, which was a way that told her things about the person looking, about how they related to books as objects and what they expected from them before they opened them. He set 2 of the 3 down and kept the third. She set him up with a library card, which was a process that she had conducted thousands of times over 6 years, and that she conducted now with the same quality of attention she brought to everything she did in the branch, because a library card was a material thing, and material things deserved the attention of being done properly. She asked his name for the card, and when he said it, she looked at him over the counter and said it back to him in the way of confirming the spelling, which was not the reason she said it back. She said it back because saying it back was the moment at which she had decided to say it, the moment that had been building since the Tuesday afternoon in the reference section when she had found the photograph. He heard her say it back, and he looked at her, and she held the look and did not give anything away and did not look away, and the moment was the moment of 2 people who both knew something and were each assessing what the other knew and what the knowing meant. She completed the library card. He took the card and the book and said the 2 words again, and this time the 2 words had the quality of something else in them, not obligation and not the restoration she had seen on the bench when he stood to leave, but the quality of a person who was in the presence of something they did not have a category for and who was using the available words because they were the available words. He left. She watched him go through the glass panel of the door until he was past the point where the angle of the door's glass permitted the watching. At 4:45, 15 minutes before closing, a man came in who was not the man she had been thinking about, which she registered before she registered anything else about him, the specific awareness of what someone was not before she was aware of what they were. He was younger and leaner, and had the quality of a man who was in the branch for a purpose that was not the purpose of the branch, not in the way of people who came to libraries for purposes the library was not officially for, which happened often and which she was accustomed to navigating, but in the way of a man who had an errand here that had been assigned to him rather than chosen by him. He looked around the branch and came to her desk and asked her if the man from the bench had been in, and he used a specific enough description that she understood he knew who he was looking for, and she told him, with the quality of information she gave to anyone who asked about another patron, which was no information, because patron information was not information she shared, and the reason was not the man from the bench specifically, but the principle that had governed her professional conduct for 6 years, and that did not make exceptions for people who had the specific quality of men who were accustomed to exceptions being made for them. He left. She closed the branch. She walked home through the evening in the specific quality of state that came from having been in a situation that was more complex than she had started the day intending to be in, and she walked through it and arrived at the apartment and made dinner with what was available and sat at the table and thought, and the thinking was the same thinking she had been doing since the rainy Tuesday, the thinking of a person who was holding multiple kinds of information and waiting for the picture they made together to become clear. He returned the book on the following Monday. He had read it, which she could tell not because he said so, but because of the specific way he set it on the desk, the way that people set books down when they had been through them rather than the way they set books down when they were returning something they had not used, the 2 gestures being subtly different in a way that she had learned to read, as she had learned to read all the things that happened at her desk, which was by paying attention for long enough that the patterns revealed themselves without being forced. She took the book and set it on the return cart, and she asked, in the way she asked patrons who had read something she had chosen for them, whether it had been what they were looking for. He was quiet for a moment that was not the quiet of a person considering a polite answer, but the quiet of a person who was actually thinking about the answer.
It was not what I was looking for in the sense that I had not been looking for anything specifically, but it was something.
And he said it in a way that did not explain what the something was, the way that people described things they had received from books that they could not fully articulate, which was often the best kind of thing a book could produce.
I am glad.
Which was the response she had for these situations, and she meant it in the same specific way she always meant it, which was that she was glad not in the abstract but in the particular, glad that this specific person had received something from this specific book. He did not leave immediately. He stood at the desk with the quality of a man who had something else and was deciding whether to proceed with it, which was a state she recognized from 6 years of people standing at the desk with things they had decided to say and not yet said, and she waited without encouraging or discouraging, which was the appropriate waiting.
The man who came to the branch on Wednesday afternoon had been sent by my brother.
He said this as though he was explaining something and did not want it to be interpreted as an explanation of more than what it was, which was a piece of context being offered to correct a possible misinterpretation. She received it with the quality she received information at the desk, which was attentively and without immediate conclusion.
It had not changed how I handled the inquiry.
Which was the accurate thing to say and not a response that required follow-up from him. He asked if she could help him find something else to read. This was the structure of the previous visit reproduced, and she understood the structure as the structure available to him for spending time in the branch, the structure that the branch's purpose made available and that did not require any other justification. And she was glad for the structure, because it was the honest use of what the branch was for, and she preferred honest uses over other kinds. She asked the questions, and this time the answers were different from the previous time, in a specific way. They were more specific, which meant he had been thinking about what he wanted from reading and had arrived at more precision than the first time, which meant the first time had produced something that he had continued to think about, which was the purpose of the first time. What the answers suggested this time was also different. Less about people in general, and more about a particular kind of person. The kind who had made decisions that were not recoverable, and who then had to live in the world those decisions produced, not as a moral exercise, but as a factual condition. She had books for this. She had always had books for everything, but she had books for this, particularly because it was one of the subjects that the best literature returned to reliably, the subject of irreversibility and what people did inside it. And she went to the stacks with the specific knowledge she had, and she came back with 2 books instead of 3 because the narrower specification permitted the narrower selection, and the narrower selection was more likely to be right. He took both. He came back 3 days later and returned both and asked for more. And by the 3rd visit, the exchanges at the desk had acquired the specific quality of exchanges between 2 people who were learning the other's way of thinking by means of a subject they were both interested in, which in this case was books in the sense that she was interested in them professionally and he was interested in them in the specific and private way that people who had not read recently became interested in them when they started. Again, the way that an activity rediscovered after a long gap was more vivid for the gap. She chose for him with the knowledge she was building about what he was looking for and what he received from what he found, and the choosing was one of the best parts of the work she did, the specific application of what she knew about books to what she knew about the person in front of her, and it was better with him than it was with most patrons, because the information she was building about what he was looking for was more specific, and because the application of it was being tested in real time by his returns and his requests. She knew who he was throughout all of this. She had not forgotten and had not pretended to forget, and had not resolved the information from the academic text into something that was easier to hold. She was holding both kinds of information, the information from the bench and the information from the text, and she was not forcing them to resolve into a single picture of him, because she understood that people were not single pictures, and that the pictures you had of someone depended on the information you had about them, and the information you had depended on the sources you had access to, and the sources told you different things about different aspects of the person, and none of them told you everything. This was something she knew from working with information all day, every day for 6 years. She knew it professionally, and she was applying it to a situation that was personal, but that benefited from the professional knowledge. It was on the 4th visit, which was a Thursday, that she said it. She had decided she was going to say it at some point, and the specific point was this one, because she had gathered what she needed to gather to say it accurately, and because the picture she had been assembling was complete enough that the gap between the two kinds of information she was holding was no longer productive and was starting to produce a different kind of discomfort, the discomfort of knowing something and not saying you know it in a relationship where the not saying was beginning to feel like a choice that had weight. She was not a person who found it easy to carry choices that had weight without acknowledging that she was carrying them. She waited until he brought the fourth set of books to the desk, and she had checked them in, and the transaction part of the visit was complete, and then she looked at him across the desk in the full afternoon light of the Calloway branch's main reading room, and she said that she knew who he was.
I know who you are. I have known since the day after the bench, which was when I found the photograph in the reference section. The knowing has not changed how I have treated you as a patron, because it is not the kind of knowing that changes how I treat people as patrons. I am telling you now, not because I expect it to change anything, but because I have found that not saying things I know when the not saying has become a weight is something I am not good at sustaining.
He was very still after she said it. He was the kind of still that was not stillness by default, but stillness by choice, the stillness of a person who had trained themselves to produce it in moments when the untrained response would have been something other than still, and she watched the stillness, and she did not add to what she had said, because she had said what she needed to say, and adding to it would have been managing the silence rather than letting it be what it was. When he spoke, he did not deny it. He did not confirm it either, which was the response of a person who understood that some things were neither confirmed nor denied, but were simply in the space between people who both knew them.
The branch was not what I had expected when I came in on the Wednesday.
And the way he said it was the way that people said things about experiences that had not met their expectations in the direction they expected to be surprised, which was to say he had expected less and received more, and he was saying so without exactly saying what the more was. She asked him about the flowers at the base of the oak tree, not as an interrogation but as the question of a person who had been thinking about a specific thing for several days and who now had the occasion to ask about it. He looked at her for a moment before he answered, the look of a person determining whether the question was being asked in the register in which he wanted to answer it, and she waited and did not give him the register because the register had to be his.
My brother died in an accident in the park when he was young. The bench is the bench nearest to the place where the accident happened. I come on the anniversary because it is the only day in the year when I do something that is entirely without purpose, except to be in the place where my brother had been.
He said the last part in the way that people said things they had not said before, with the specific quality of first saying that she had noticed in some of his earlier responses, and she received it with the same attention she had given to those earlier responses, without producing anything in response that would have made him feel that the saying of it had been a mistake. They were both quiet for a while after that. The branch had the quality it had in the late afternoon of Thursday, which was the specific quiet of a space between the after-school rush and the evening patrons, the quiet of a space that was available and undivided, and she was aware of the quality of the space and of the two of them in it, across the desk from each other with the things that had been said in the air between them and the afternoon light doing what it did.
I am glad the branch was something other than what you expected.
And she said it in the specific way she said things that were true and that she wanted to be heard as true rather than as the appropriate response, which was a distinction she had become capable of producing by the time she had been doing this work for a few years, the distinction between saying something true and saying something appropriate, and the distinction had a texture that she had learned to make apparent. He picked up the new books she had chosen for him, and he held them for a moment and looked at them and then looked at her. And the look was the look of a person who was in a situation they had not anticipated and who had not yet determined what to do with being in it, which was, she thought, an honest place for him to be. And honesty was something she had found to be more useful than its alternatives. October continued, and the trees in the park finished what they had begun, and the bench was there every day, whether anyone sat on it or not, and the Calloway branch continued to be the Calloway branch, which meant it continued to be open on its scheduled hours and to contain what it contained, and to serve the people who came through its doors in the ways those people needed to be served, and Juno continued to be the person who made most of those determinations. The determinations about what the branch contained and how it served, and what the hours were, and what the programs were, and what should be done about the 40% budget cut that she was still working on responding to in ways that were not simply organizational acceptance of a reduced reality. Marcus came back, which she had thought he would, but had not decided in advance that she had thought, because deciding in advance that she had thought something was the kind of anticipatory certainty that she had found was usually wrong in specific ways that became visible when the anticipated thing either happened differently than anticipated or did not happen at all. He came back on the Monday of the following week, and he had finished the books, and he brought them back in the same way, the way of books that had been read rather than returned. And they did not repeat the Thursday conversation in the sense of returning to it directly, but they continued from it in the sense that the Thursday conversation had cleared something, and what was on the other side of the clearing was a different kind of conversation. Still at the desk in the Calloway branch's main reading room, still about books in the first instance, and then about other things that the books were adjacent to. The other things were not the things she had read in the academic text. She was not asking him about those things, and he was not offering them, because both of them understood. She thought that there was a category of his life that she was not invited into and had not asked to be invited into, and that the category was not what the Calloway branch and its desk were for, and the not inviting and the not asking were both accurate expressions of how things were, rather than either of them withholding something. The things that the conversations were about were the books, and what was in the books, and the things the books raised, which were things about how people lived inside the decisions they made, which was the subject she had identified when she was choosing for him, and which had remained the subject through the subsequent visits. And in talking about that subject, in the context of books, they were also, inevitably and honestly, talking about the subject itself, which was the subject that both of them had some experience of living inside. His brother Reed came to the branch once more, on a Friday in November, and this time he came in with the quality of a man who had decided to conduct a different kind of errand than the first time, not an information-gathering errand, but a conversation errand, and she received him at the desk with the same professional welcome she received all patrons, and she listened to what he said, which was that his brother was not the kind of man who had time for the things he had been spending time on.
Patrons of the Calloway branch are welcome to spend their time however they choose, as long as they are using the branch for what it is for.
And the way she said it made clear that she was not going to be a productive conversation partner for the conversation he had come to have, which was not a hostile clarity, but was the clarity of a person who knew the difference between her territory and someone else's, and was staying in hers. He left without having accomplished what he had come to accomplish, and she noted that he did not seem surprised by this, which meant he had not been certain the errand would produce the result he had been sent to produce, which meant the conversation had been sent to her rather than chosen by him, which told her something about the relationship between Reed and Marcus. That was consistent with what she had read in the academic text, and also with what she had understood from the way Marcus had mentioned him on the Monday, when he explained the Wednesday visit. Marcus came to the branch twice more in November and once in early December, and each time he brought back what he had taken, and each time he asked for more, and the exchange had by December acquired the quality of an established thing rather than a thing that was still determining whether it would continue. And she thought about this quality when she thought about what was happening between her and the man whose name she had looked up in the reference section, which was that something was happening that was becoming established, and that the becoming established was something neither of them was trying to prevent. She did not tell anyone about it because there was not yet a version of it that she knew how to tell. She knew how to tell about a patron who came in regularly and who she was choosing books for. That was a thing she could tell, but what she was not sure how to tell was the part that was more than that, the part that existed in the quality of the conversations at the desk and the specific quality of his attention. and the way that she had found herself thinking about the books she was choosing for him with a different quality of attention from the attention she brought to choosing for other patrons, not more careful but more considered in a way that was personal, that had to do with what she was coming to understand about what he was looking for and what she was choosing in response to that. On the Friday before Christmas, which was the last day the branch was open before the holiday closure, he came in at 11 in the morning, which was earlier than any of the previous visits. He brought back the books he had, and he asked for more, and she chose for him, and he took the books, and then he said something that was not about the books.
I am going to be in the city over the holidays. The park will be cold, but the bench will still be there.
And he said it in the way of something that was being offered rather than stated, offered in the way that people offered things when they were not sure how the offering would be received, and were therefore making it in a form that could be either an invitation or a neutral observation, depending on how it was received. She looked at him and she thought about the bench in the rain in October, and the flowers at the base of the oak tree, and the 4 words about his brother that had been the first saying of them.
Cold benches have the advantage of being less crowded than warm ones.
Which was the response that was neither the acceptance nor the deflection of an invitation, but was something in between that was also a kind of answer. He left with the books, and the branch had the quality it had in the late morning of the last day before the holiday closure, which was the quality of a space that was doing what it did in the knowledge that it was about to stop doing it for a few days. A quality she always noticed, and that she always found to be pleasant. The quality of a thing at its own natural end, rather than at an externally imposed one. She turned her attention to the closing tasks, and the holiday preparations and the final steps of the budget cut response, which she had been working on for 2 months, and which she had arrived at a version of that she was prepared to present after the holiday. The year turned, and October came again, the way October came again every year, with the specific quality of Octobers in this city, which was the quality she had described to him when they were talking about the branch and he had asked about the light. On the Tuesday of the 2nd October, which was not raining but was cold in the way that October Tuesdays in this city were cold when they were not also raining, she walked to the park with her lunch, which was a sandwich she had made that morning. This time the sandwich was not the last of its kind before Friday. The Friday had come and she had received her salary, and the branch's budget cut response had been accepted, and the programs were continuing, and the sandwich in her bag was not the last sandwich, was simply lunch, and she was taking it to the park because the park was where she went on Tuesdays and Thursdays when the weather permitted, and the cold was the kind that permitted it. He was already at the bench when she arrived. He was not sitting in the rain because there was no rain, was simply sitting on the bench in the October cold, with the specific quality of a man who was where he had decided to be, the same quality she had read in him the year before, when she had first seen him. And at the base of the oak tree there were flowers, this year slightly fresher than last year, as though the flowers were something that was improving in the attention given to them alongside the improving of something else. She sat down at the bench, not at the other end but in the middle, which was the distance that 1 year of Thursday afternoons at the desk in the Calloway branch's main reading room had produced, between the bench with the last sandwich and the bench with ordinary lunch. And she took the sandwich out of her bag and broke it in half, and he looked at the half she held out, and he looked at her, and she looked back at him, and neither of them needed to say anything about it because the thing it was already understood between them, and the October park did what it did, and the bench held what it held, and she was glad to be in it.